All right, welcome to this quick guide that's going to be covering SMITE. So SMITE is a 5v5 style MOBA game where a team of players work towards the common goal of destroying the enemy team's Titan. Each god has their own unique skills and abilities to give them an advantage over the opposing team characters. You can pick from 119 gods currently as I'm making this video, and they all hail from different types of Roman, Mayan, Chinese, Egyptian, Celtic, Japanese. You pretty much name it, and they are coming from some sort of mythology or legend within cultures. Each god has 5 abilities, 4 active skills, and 1 passive ability. Every time you level up, a player gets to allocate 1 skill point into an ability. Here I've pictured Cupid's abilities and his passive. For example, here I highlighted his 1, which is called his Heart Bomb, and it sends out a projectile, and if it lands on a minion or enemy god, they're marked for 3 seconds. And if Cupid continuously lands an auto attack on the marked unit, it will build damage when it explodes after the duration. And as you can see here with the damage section, every single time that you add 1 skill point into this skill, the damage is going to be going up. And then it will actually use some physical power as well, depending on the items that you build. Some other features of this item here is that it actually has a 20% slow as well. So if you land this on an enemy, it will actually slow their progression and allow you to go ahead and essentially chase them down. Understanding all 5 of these abilities for each god is extremely important, not only to how that you play them, but how that you play against them as well. Some gods will have skills and abilities that will actually buff, like their attack speed, provide their team with shields, or that you can root them in place, which is called crowd control or CC. Or that some even have a global ultimate that allows them to either travel around the map quickly, or that it will allow them to deal damage across all enemy teams. If we look here at the rest of, say, Cupid's abilities, his number 2 there is Share the Love, and he essentially throws down a ring of hearts around him, and himself and his allies are able to go ahead and collect the hearts, and it will actually heal their abilities. His 3 is called Flutter, and this is his dash. This allows him either to chase down and kind of hunt down, if you will, the enemy team that he's chasing, or it allows him to escape easily. His ultimate ability, which becomes available on level 5, is called Fields of Love. And this is essentially a circle that gets put down, and any enemy that's in there, if you then go ahead and hit them a few times, it essentially detonates as well. And so there's a lot of big damage with the ultimate. For many gods, their ultimate does a significant amount of damage. And then if we were to actually look at his passive called Love Struck is he's got like 8 hearts that sit on the monitor, and when you're playing, and every time that you hit an auto attack on a minion or on an enemy, it builds up his passive, and when there's so many hearts available, you do increased damage as well. So it's really important to understand the entire kit of every single god and how they work and operate, not only for when you play them, but also then when you're playing against them in lane or just in team comp as well. In SMITE, there are 5 key roles. We have the solo, we have the jungle, we have mid, carry, and support. And each of these has a certain area of the map that their main role is to go ahead and cover, as well as then certain character classes that fill in each of these different types of roles. Here are the 5 different classes that are available for gods in SMITE. The first one up here is going to be your warrior. Over here on the left, this is then typically a solo or jungle class. They're usually pretty tanky. They have decent damage, a lot of engage and crowd control. Usually your front line is going to be a warrior when you're getting into the team fight stages of the game. Mage is typically a mid laner. They have a lot of burst damage from range, and they're typically your backline in a team fight. You also then have the Hunter position, which is also called your carry. This is then, again, another thing of big burst damage. Their range, they're typically the back line. The mage and the hunter are usually your primary damage outputs within the game. Fourth is your guardian. This is typically the support or solo role, depending on what the current meta looks like. But they are specifically extremely tanky. There are a lot of engage and CC. Some of them have what we call peel. And peel is the ability in order to protect your mage and your carry in the backline, in order to save them, essentially, when in late game team fights. They're also the ability to be your front line. And then last but not least is your assassin position. This is typically a jungle or solo. They're extremely high in burst damage, a lot of mobility, and are often, when played in jungle, they're going to be your flank. So they're going to try to come in and sneak into the backline of a team fight and try to take out the enemy team's hunter and mage. So I did put that there are asterisks next to many of these roles because depending on what the current patch is, and high-res occasionally, every couple of weeks usually, they release a patch. And a patch will either increase or decrease skills and abilities on gods, or they'll actually increase or decrease damage output on weapons or armor or something like that. And this is typically referred to as buffs and nerfs. So it's important to keep up on the various patches and what items are receiving increased damages or increased protections or whatever it may be, because it will really shift which gods are considered to be meta. So once you've found a character that you would like to play, it's important to understand the items that should be built on that character. Just because it sounds like an awesome item doesn't mean that it will work with your character. Once the game begins, you will buy what is called a starter item, and this will usually help you in the early game. For example, if your character is a support or guardian, you'll most likely be buying the Sentinel's Gift down here at the bottom. It's a great starter item for supports because you don't want to be last hitting minions and taking the experience from your carry, but you do want to help them clear the way faster so that they can get experience faster, and which will allow them to level up. And Sentinel's Gift has a unique passive ability that if you get an assist on an enemy minion or jungle camp, you get additional gold. So killing minions will allow you to go ahead and receive gold, but you want most of that gold to be going to your carry when you're a support because they're going to be the primary damage output and we want them to get ahead faster in the game. There are many items in SMITE, and it is important that you know not only how the item works for your character, but how it interacts with the enemy teams or even potentially your own team. You'll learn that there are situational items that need to be purchased to help your character and your team, while there are many items that you will never ever build for your character. So I put 2 additional items here just to kind of show you some different effects of items that have. So, for example, if we look at Transcendence, this is a very popular item on certain junglers as well as most hunters. Depending on what the current state of the meta is, Transcendence may be the first item that you try to build as a hunter, because at 50 stacks, it actually evolves into the next level of the item, which will then actually give an additional 10% cooldown reduction, and it has a lot more physical power to your character. On the other side, you have Salve, as it's commonly called in the game, and this actually provides an aura. And the aura increases physical protections by 15 to your entire team. So this is a really popular item on tanky supports because it boosts your entire team while actually providing more health as well, which is important when you're a frontline tank. Salve is also sometimes built on solo or warrior classes as well, depending on the team composition that you're going into. It's really important to understand which items that the enemy team is also building, because it allows you to go ahead and prioritize different items for your own character and how it's going to go ahead and hopefully negate some of the items that the enemy team has built. SMITE does have a great built-in tool for you to tinker with builds. Here's an example of my build for Ymir. I can save this as a preset, so when I get into a game, I know exactly what items to build and often in what order to build them. Under the defensive category, I typically put a few situational items depending on the team composition I'm playing into. It also depends if we're ahead in the game or if maybe we're behind, or if my team needs a little bit more damage output or defensive auras in order to help us in late game team fights. You can check the boxes underneath each item, and it will then actually alter the stats that you see on the left there, depending on the item that is being built. So for example, you can see here that in my build, I'm going to go ahead and go with Sentinel's Gift as my starter item. I start building Gauntlet of Thebes right away. This is an evolution item, so once I get so many stacks, it will actually evolve into another item, which is really important in the early game because it gives a lot of additional health and physical and magical protections. In this current meta, when I was doing this build, I went into a Shogun second because this actually has an aura that decreases the attack speed of the enemy team within, I believe it's 90 units. It might actually be 75. But then I go into Sov because that, again, it's an aura that increases the physical protection and health regen of my team. And then Pestilence. Pestilence gives an aura as well that actually reduces the enemy team's healing ability. So mages and hunters will often buy items that have lifesteal. And Pestilence will actually cut out their ability in order to heal off of their attacks. And then down there in defensive, you can see I have a Void Stone, Witchblade, and Amulet of the Stronghold. These are my situational items in order to complete my full build, just because you never know what you're going to be playing into. You never know potentially at the end of the game what you really need as far as either its damage or physical protection. There's a lot of situational aspects to a game of Smite. And as you can see down here, I have two other open slots for relics and consumables, and I'm going to talk real quick about those as well. So relics are really important in the game of Smite. Every character has the ability to buy 2 relics. You get your first one at level 1, and depending on which character that you're playing and which role that you're playing it in will determine what type of relics that you're usually going to buy. Each relic has their own situational advantage. For example, here, if we look at the Blink rune, this allows a character in order to essentially dash forward 45 units. And so that can be used in order to close down the gap if you're chasing down the enemy team, or you can blink over walls in order to surprise the enemy team and try to take a quick advantage over them. All relics have the ability to be upgraded as well. And when you upgrade them, it will actually usually decrease the cooldown and amplify whatever the ability is of the relic. So for example, you can see the Greater Magic Shell. This is the next level after the basic relic. And this allows you to apply a shield within 35 units of 100 health plus 12 health per god level for 3 seconds. So if you're taking into a very large team fight and you're losing and you just need to be able to shield everybody on your team real quick in order to make them more sustainable, Magic Shell is the relic to go with. Now you do get a second relic when your character hits level 12. These are all really important to not only purchase, but also in order to keep track of. For example, mages and hunters will usually always take Aegis and Purification Beads. And Purification Beads essentially removes any crowd control that is currently impacting your character. So if you're a hunter and all of a sudden a guardian or a warrior comes out of nowhere and locks you down and roots you in place, the enemy team can quickly target you and burst you down, and now your team doesn't have any damage. But you can use your relic, which is Purification Beads, that removes all of it and allows you to just continue to keep moving like you had previously been doing before. And as the enemy team, it's really important to understand when the enemy team used those relics, because that cooldown means that they are now vulnerable for 2 minutes. And if there's any other team fights that are happening in the next 2 minutes, you know that you can target that hunter or that mage, and they have no way of getting out of your CC, and it should allow you to go ahead and turn a team fight. And then if you're the one that used them, you know that you need to play a little bit more passive. You need to be cautious because the enemy team is going to be looking for you. They're going to be looking to burst you down real quick. Some other items beyond just consumables. So consumables, there's usually like health potions or mana potions that allow you to go ahead and just regenerate health and mana. But some 3 really important items here that I usually recommend that everybody purchases. Well, not everybody, but wards and sentry wards are a really high priority. These give you vision, so you drop them on the map in various places, and it allows you to go ahead and have a prolonged vision for 3 minutes or until it's killed. So the normal ward there, you can hold up to 2 in your inventory, and you can place them around the map. So this is really great if you want to keep vision and keep eyes and tabs on where like the enemy jungler is rotating, or if all of a sudden they're trying to sneak one of the big objectives on the map. You want to try to keep vision on certain objectives so that way you know when they're making plays, or if you need to play passive and return under tower. So even though wards don't do damage, wards win games. The one there in the middle is called Hand of the Gods. And this is one that's usually bought early game, like right at the start, often by a guardian. Sometimes your jungler may buy it too. Again, it's situational. But essentially, there's just a little ring that goes around your character, and this giant fist comes from the heavens, and it deals 200 true damage to jungle monsters. And it's really great because it allows you to not only get the buffs for your characters faster, but it allows you to get to wave faster and get to your lane faster. So that way you can hopefully snowball and get an early game advantage, and you can try to win that first team fight. Sentry ward's a little bit different compared to the normal ward. It does allow people, if you walk over a sentry ward, they can go ahead and destroy it. But sentry wards will allow you to go ahead and actually catch out enemy wards as well. So you can actually clear out their wards, which allows you to win the vision game. And the vision game is extremely important in Smite, especially when you're starting to get to the point to where people are looking to try to take like a Gold Fury or a Pyromancer, or even if they're looking to end the game on a Fire Giant call. But we'll talk about those in just a minute. So now that we've outlined just characters and abilities, I really encourage everybody to take some time and actually learn how to play the game. It's important to understand that you're not just jumping in and you're going to be performing at a high level. It's going to probably take, 100 hours to really learn some of the intricacies of just one position. I myself have about 350 to 400 hours in the game. I also come from League of Legends having over 1,000 hours in gameplay. So there is a learning curve if you're coming over from a different MOBA, and it's really important that you pick one role and you learn about 2 to 3 different gods in that role, because when we get to the draft here, as we'll be talking about, when you have a god pool of at least 3 to 4 characters that you can play well, you understand what items to build, you understand kind of the matchups that you may be playing against, it's going to be a really big advantage going forward. Because when we get into draft here, we have the ability to go ahead and essentially ban out characters. And banning characters allows an enemy team to go ahead and maybe target ban you. So if they wanted to go ahead and say like, oh, we're really worried about this player, let's go ahead and ban 3 characters right away, so that way the mage mid laner can't get A, B, or C. So that's going to give us the advantage. So this is a really big like chess match when we get into the draft here. You can see here that there are 2 sides. We have blue and red. Each side comes with their specific advantages and disadvantages. Now, you don't get to pick your side when you're playing normally on Smite, but when you're playing a competitive match like school versus school, you can actually determine who is on what side. As you can see here, the perk of picking the blue side is getting that first pick. If you planned ahead and you have a team composition in mind, getting that first pick can make or break your strategy. Whereas on the red side, you get the final pick of the match, and this allows you to hold off until you see the entire composition of the enemy team, and allows you to pick a character that has a winning matchup versus a certain god, or maybe your team wants to flex a pick into another role. So for example, if you remember going back to those asterisks, sometimes characters can be flexed into different positions. So even though we may have locked in a Geb and it shows that maybe that's a Geb support, maybe all of a sudden we get last pick and we see what they're playing in the mid lane and like, you know what, we're actually going to go ahead and flex that Geb into mid or into jungle or whatever it may be, and allows us to pick something that's better going into the other enemy composition. So games are often won and lost right here in the draft phase. Now, the draft phase, when you're doing draft conquest, you have things called picks and bans. And I've kind of briefly talked about how the banning phases work and why we do it. But let's run down what that actually looks like. So, number one, each player must have at least 20 gods unlocked to participate in a draft conquest game. There are 4 phases of picks and bans. Phase 1 here, each side gets to ban 3 gods that neither team is allowed to play, and they take turns banning. So here you can see it goes blue, red, blue, red, blue, red. After phase 1 is done, so we've taken 6 gods off of the table, and you can't duplicate them, neither team is allowed to play any of those 6 gods that we just banned. Now when we get into phase 2, each side will get to pick a god that they want to play, and there can be no duplicates played. So red side gets the last pick in this phase, which can be important as well. So as you see here in phase 2, it goes blue gets their first and highest priority pick. Then red gets 2 picks, blue 2 picks, and then red gets the last pick there. So now we've selected our first 6 gods. Each team should have 3. We've also banned 6 additional gods. Now we're going down into phase 3, where each team gets to go ahead and ban 2 more gods. This is usually a step that when we're drafting team composition, we may want to go ahead and focus whatever the remaining role is that's available. So say, for example, the enemy team picked their support, their warrior, and their mid. We know that jungle and carry are still left to be picked in phase 4. So as our team, we may decide to say, looking at their jungler, saying, well, we really don't want them to play Thanatos, and we don't want them to play Thor. So let's go ahead and focus on the jungle, so that way they limit the pool that can be picked from in phase 4. Now, once we go ahead and we move through phase 3, we finish up phase 4, which is the last step of picks and bans. So each side then gets to pick their last 2 picks, with red getting the final pick. And I can't stress enough that sometimes that last pick is really important, because you get to see the entire team composition that you're going to be going against. And depending on how big your god pool is, it may allow you to go ahead and really counterpick a god that has skills and abilities that just demolish the other team. So it's really important to again, not only know the characters that you like to play, but how all these other characters play in certain roles and positions. The picks and bans phase is a very fun chess match. When you learn a lot of the intricacies of the game, this is my favorite part personally. Once your team has been drafted, it's time to get into the map. As I'm putting this together, and if you're watching this presentation in the future, it is important to know that SMITE often changes features on the map. So this could neglect future updates. The map shown is the current one for Season 9. There are 3 specific lanes. You have duo, mid, and solo. And the 4th area is called the jungle, which doesn't have a technical lane. So if we look here, we have this one right here on the left-hand side. This is going to be your duo lane. You're able to go ahead and identify it when you're looking at the map because of this little nook or this alcove here. On this side, this is your solo lane. And then in the mid here, this is obviously going to be your mid lane. Everything else not in those lanes there is considered to be the jungle area. And so one way too that you can look and determine which side that your character needs to be reporting to is where certain buffs are. And I'll talk about the buffs here in just a second, but you'll have your green buff, your purple buff, your red buff, yellow, and blue. These buffs are really important because, again, they buff your character. Early game and throughout the game, these buffs are really important. They add a lot of sustainability, regeneration, increased attack speed, so on and so forth. So to kind of give you an idea of early game path, so once you go ahead and spawn into the map, you're going to go ahead and buy your starter item and probably the first step into one of your items. And then you're going to go ahead and start reporting to lane. Your duo lane is going to go first here to the green buff. This buff right here is usually for the support or the guardian. So it allows for like health regeneration and some mana regeneration as well. So once you go ahead and take the green buff, you're going to go ahead and move over here. Your carry and support are going to move over to purple buff. Now, if you remember when I talked about the Hand of the Gods, this is the camp that your support will drop the Hand of the Gods on because it clears 2 of the minions and then allows you to focus on the last minion there. The purple buff goes over to your carry. It helps with increased damages, and then after you've cleared those 2 camps, you move here to your lane, where you'll be met with minion waves as they're coming out, and this is really important that your support uses their abilities on this first minion wave here, because this first wave will determine who gets leveled 2 first. And that 1 level advantage in the early game is extremely important and can often result in the first blood, which is then going to give over a bunch of gold to the team that gets first blood. Meanwhile, your jungle and your mid laner are going to come out of spawn, and they're going to go to the yellow buff, and they're going to go ahead and take that, and then they're actually going to rotate over to the red buff. And as we're talking right now, on the current patch and the current meta, then your jungler is going to assist your mid laner going into the mid lane here and actually clearing wave and then potentially putting a little bit of pressure on the enemy team. After you've kind of like done this little dance here in the mid lane, your jungler is kind of then free to go and roam. The jungler usually will jump over and they'll start taking some of these harpy camps by the blue buff. And then they kind of flow around depending, and they put pressure on lanes and stuff like that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Meanwhile, your solo laner, well, they're on their own. They're going to go over here to blue buff, which then allows for mana regeneration. Your warriors and your solo laners usually spam out a lot of skills and abilities, so they need the mana regeneration extremely bad in the early game. That way they can clear waves faster. They're often usually skirmishing each other inside of lane because they're trying to get priority to win lane, basically, as it's called. So that way they can prioritize the totem that's right next to the fire giant. And totem gives global experience and global gold, which is important to go ahead and get ahead. So typically, as I was talking, the jungler, after they clear this kind of the mid wave here, they'll go and they'll clear the harpy camps over by the blue buff, which means that they're in an early game position to try to go ahead and assist the solo laner. So it's really important for your jungler and your solo laner to be in constant communication in the early game, because once you rotate over to these harpies, you may be looking to make an early play here. You're going to go ahead and allow your duo lane in order to hopefully try to get first blood over there, but your jungler can really influence the solo lane early game too, and that makes a huge difference. Now, if we were to go ahead and... Oh, sorry. So, I probably should use my laser pointer to start with, but... I forgot where I was at. As far as vision goes, though, so if we're on the orange side here, if we're coming down this direction, I do recommend usually trying to get some vision. So dropping a ward here, and so early level you get a free ward as well. So placing wards like here, if you're on the orange side and you can get kind of some deep vision over here, or even close to here, that way you can try to go ahead and keep track of where the enemy jungler is early and often. I'll talk a little bit more about the map here in just a second as far as some of these neutral objectives and what they play. So there are a lot of neutral objectives inside of the map. We have things called trophies, and here you can kind of see these trophies that are across the map. And what these are is they're a new feature on the current map that if you collect enough of these trophies, it will actually go ahead and spawn a trebuchet. And the trebuchet will then move down one of these lanes in order to go ahead and push waves, potentially help you take towers, and really put the pressure on the enemy team that they are going to need to rotate over. You have the harpies, and again, so like harpy camps are here. They're the white ones. These are typically your jungler's main source of experience. Now, it's not to say that your jungler is the only one that's allowed to go ahead and take some of these camps. Your mid laner is most likely going to be prioritizing this harpy camp and this harpy camp as well if they've pushed their wave to the enemy tower. Getting this additional experience points is extremely important because it's trying to get a level advantage. And level advantages are a huge deal in Smite. After the harpies, we have what are called oracles. And the oracles are going to be over here in the gold fury pit. Getting the oracles will allow you to go ahead and maintain vision over this pit for about 90 seconds. They're a pretty easy camp to clear, and you may want to go ahead and prioritize those early. If your duo lane gets an early game advantage, they may want to try to go ahead and prioritize getting the harpies the oracles, while also clearing these harpy camps over here. We then have the gold fury, and that's going to be located right here, right next to the oracles. And the gold fury is a really extremely important early game objective because defeating it not only gives you a large amount of gold and experience, it will actually go ahead and then spawn the next one. And the earlier you can get the gold fury, then the earlier things like the Oni fury and primal fury will go ahead and spawn. And so depending on the rotation, and they randomly spawn in order here, but after the gold fury has been taken, in a few minutes it will respawn, and this time it'll be either an Oni or a primal fury. And the Oni fury will actually buff your minions in all three lanes, and it gives them increased damage, increased health, and actually increases their defensive stats. This means that all of your minion waves as they're coming out of spawn are actually going to be winning lane on their own. So it allows teams in order to go ahead and rotate when they have the Oni Fury buff in order to put pressure across the entire map. If it's a Primal Fury that spawns, it's another really powerful one. Defeating it then gives the killer's team a stacking 7% damage buff and a 7% reduced damage from jungle camps. So getting this will actually increase the damage from your mages and your hunters and your warriors. But then it also allows you to take 7% reduced damage from jungle camps, which is going to be important if you're going to be rotating over and looking to take either the Pyromancer or the Fire Giant in late game. And the Primal Fury will actually be able to stack 3 times in a game if you go that late. So you can potentially be receiving a 21% damage buff, which is huge. On the other side of the map, in a different pit over here, we have the Fire Giant and we have the Pyromancer. Both of these are, again, important ones in order to go ahead and look to try to take when they're available. Usually we're trying to go ahead and say probably around the level 10 to 12 mark, you're going to be looking to go ahead and make some of these. Depending on your team composition, you may be able to take things like the Gold Fury earlier. Even the Pyromancer sometimes can be taken a little bit earlier than 10. It just depends on your team composition. But the Pyromancer is one of the strongest ones in the game, and defeating it will give you something called the Blazing Haste. And this effect then increases player movement speed across the map. So Pyro is actually really important, so that way you can rotate around the map faster, which allows you to put more pressure in different lanes to take different tower objectives. And the enemy team will not be able to go ahead and keep up. They'll also not be able to run away as quickly from team fights. And last but not least, the strongest of the strong is going to be your Fire Giant. This is probably your biggest win condition in a game of Smite. Destroying the Fire Giant gives you an incredible team sustainability and regeneration. This allows you to siege towers, so your towers and phoenixes, and at the very end here, down here is the Titan. So if your team gets the Fire Giant, all members that are alive will be given the Fire Giant buff, and then this allows you to siege those late game towers and phoenixes and ultimately push for your win. And so it allows you to push pressure and try to take some questionable, sometimes team fights, because you have that sustainability and you have that increased damage output. So I know that I have thrown a lot at you for Smite, but ultimately, this is the basic rundown of the game. It will change a little bit here and there depending on the patches, depending on the seasons, depending on the nerfs and buffs of items and gods. But ultimately, this is just the basic rundown of what a game of Smite looks like and how you can go ahead and start to better help your program understand the intricacies of the game. But just understanding the intricacies is not enough compared to in-game experience as well. And I cannot encourage people enough in order to get in and play some games. Practice, practice, practice. And that's an overview of Smite. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me and I will help answer anything and everything that you have.